Hello, everyone. I am today with another amazing guest that I have had already on my channel, Luke Eastwood, author and researcher in ancient Celtic traditions and also in other ancient traditions in other cultures. And Luke Eastwood has come up with a new book which is groundbreaking because it puts together information. Oh my goodness. Lucas Wood, how are you?
Hi, Elena. Thank you very much for having me back again. And yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I just brought out this new book at the beginning of March, and yeah, I'm very happy with how it's been received so far. And yeah, it's been a lot of work actually to get it together. It took me about 3 years to do all the research and then the writing. I mean, most of that was really research, actually, to be honest. About 6 months to write the book and get it finished. But a lot of time in preparation before I actually started doing any real writing.
So this book is this one, Scotia, the lost sister of Tutankhamun. This only the title I was what? So intrigued. So tell us about the subject of this book. What is it about?
Okay, well, there is this famous character in Ireland and also in Scotland who's Scotia or Scotia. Sometimes people pronounce it or Scotta, depending on which of the medieval manuscripts you're looking at. It should be called one of those three names. And she ended up in southwest Ireland on the very beginning of the Dingle Peninsula. There was a quite famous battle in Irish history, well known to people who live in Kerry, not so well known by people outside of, of Munster, which is like the southern province, southwest province of Ireland. And then, so the rest of the world, people really don't know anything about that story in general. Although there's been a lot more interest in recent years. If you look on ancient origins and things like that, there's mentions of her. There's quite a lot of mentions on the internet now, but most of it's not gone into any great detail. So, I mean, um, I know that you know who she is because of you did some work with Billy Lean, the stonemason on this obelisk, which is just outside the town of Tralee in County Kerry. And that is at the corner of the road that goes to where her grave not is, but the access to her grave. So you see the obelisk, and then you go up the road, and eventually you see a little brown sign. There's a photo of it in the book, actually. And then you have to walk quite a long way to actually find her grave. So really, I come to all that at the end of the book, really, because there's some interesting discoveries I found about her grave. So the book is pretty much chronological. So it starts off in Egypt with her grandfather, Amenhotep the third, I mean, sorry. Her father, who was Amenhotep the fourth, who changed his name to Akhenaten, which is probably the core of why she ended up in Ireland. He did something that was revolutionary, and he started basically a new religion. And he took one element of traditional Egyptian polytheism and sort of plucked that out and made that the main sort of plank or the central part of his belief system called the Artan. And he changed his name. He changed the children's names were all connected with the Artan. He set up a whole city in further south from the usual, so Memphis and Heliopolis and there's all these places that were traditional to Egyptian religion and the pharaohs, he created a brand new city called Akhenaten in what's now called Amarna. And this was like just so revolutionary and sort of unheard of. It did create a crisis in Egypt, and really that's what led to his daughter Mary Tatum, his oldest daughter, uh, fleeing Egypt, ending up possibly in Greece briefly, definitely in Spain, and then Scotland and Ireland. And then you've got this connection that's kind of broken by quite a long time in the accounts. I think sort of the old world accounts end around the Ptolemaic period, around 200-300 BC, and then you get a gap, and then in the medieval period, from about the 5th century CE onwards, you're getting that same story but with a different name, different person, who's referred to as Scotta or Scotia. So I guess the purpose of this book was really to look into, was this story actually real? I didn't sort of approach it from the point of view that, my thesis is 100% correct, and I'm just trying to ignore stuff that contradicts the story. I tried to find stuff that will reinforce or corroborate the story, but I didn't. I didn't actually find anything that would disprove it. And if I had done, then I probably wouldn't have written the book. I would have just given up, because obviously, if it was clear that it wasn't possible, or as then it would have been pointless to even do the book. But a lot of things that also led me towards doing this, I kept coming across her in various ways. Mentioned about the obelisk, obviously, and then there's this book which you'll be familiar with because you illustrated. Gary Brannigan asked you to illustrate the book, and I ended up collaborating with him because obviously we both know him, and he was finding he was just way too busy to finish the book. So he says, would I help him? And I reluctantly at first agreed, and then I was like really glad I did actually, because I hadn't really put together something with all these short stories. But anyway, there's your illustration. I know you're way too busy to do illustrations these days, but that's for that story, The Pharaoh's Daughter. Um, so anyway, yeah, that one was co-written and with him, and then I did an extended version of the story in this. But when I'm talking about story, I'm literally talking about a story, not a historical account. So in this book, I have an extended version, my own take on that. And then around that time, I was thinking, yeah, maybe I should look into this further. So on one of the visits to the site, I discovered something rather strange. I've never been able to find the Ogham inscriptions. I think they're worn out. That are recorded a long time ago. I don't think anyone's actually found that. It's just a record of what was written there. But what I did find was actually you've got the two graves there. The smaller grave is a pile of stones, which is for her horse, apparently. And next to that, you've got the main grave, which is 2 or 3 meters wide, a ring of stones, and then a central, slightly larger stone. It was pouring rain, and I noticed there were lines on that rock, and I was thinking, oh, that looks a bit odd. These sort of crisscrossing lines and whatever, and I couldn't really make out what they were exactly, but I thought that doesn't look natural. That looks strange. Straight lines. Straight lines don't occur that much in nature, really, do they? So I thought, that looks like it's man-made. So I took a whole bunch of photos of the stone. I think each side of the stone and the top I took photographs of, and then had a look at them later. So those are in the book. And as it turns out, yeah, there we go. There are some interesting, what we call them, shapes, patterns, inscriptions that came up. And at least two of them correspond with Egyptian hieroglyphs. Very badly drawn, I might add, but they actually do match with pretty close match with two known hieroglyphs. So I mean, I didn't have the time to exhaustively go through every single hieroglyph that exists and try and match it against symbols. That would be a job for actually something like a AI or a computer would do a better analysis of that rather than, you know yourself, if you look through a dictionary of hieroglyphs, it's kind of mind-boggling. Your eyes are like you're trying to scan all these. You know, there's I think
Kind of.
was there over 1,000 by that time period. I think some.
Oh yeah, a little bit more than that. Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, trying to go for all of that to try and find matches. I suppose it was to be even to find two is quite fortunate. So, I mean, that seems a bit more than a coincidence to me, given that there's all this other history and there's all these amazing finds that have happened in the last 20, 30 years, especially the DNA analysis, the finds of beads in the Hill of Tara, and also in Britain. There's an archaeologist called Lorraine Evans has done a lot of work on the Sphinx beads and various other things. So there's a lot to suggest that um, the Egyptians, at least a number of them, have visited both Britain and Ireland in the ancient past. And the thing that really struck me, which I hadn't heard of until I started looking into this book, was Thor Heyerdahl. I'm probably massacring his name, a Norwegian explorer who made two Egyptian replica boats, Ra 1 and Ra 2. He kind of made a bit of a mess of the first one. He forgot an important feature, and that sort of made it most of the way across the Atlantic, and then it sank. And then Ra 2, he fixed that problem, this oversight, which of something that should have been included in the boat that he didn't. That was totally successful, and he managed to sail all the way from Morocco to Barbados in that boat. So he completely crossed the whole of the Atlantic in his Egyptian boat. And before that, people have poo-pooed the idea that Egyptians could do such a thing, or that, you know, any of the other groups like the Mycenaeans or the Phoenicians could have done a similar thing. So this proved that that's not the case. So the idea of getting to Britain or Ireland, that's not really very far in comparison to reaching the Americas, is it? But then you've got this other interesting fact that some of the mummies, Egyptian mummies, have been tested and they've looked at sort of things like the pollen, etc., various bits and pieces that are found on their bodies. And one of the things they found was tiny samples of cocaine in the nostrils of some of the mummies. And there's only one place that you can get cocaine from in the ancient world, and even even till relatively recently, the only place where it would be grown is Central and South America. So how on earth would mummies that are 3,000-4,000 years old have tiny, tiny little amounts of cocaine in their nostrils? How could that happen? The only way it could happen is if someone had brought that from Central or South America across to Egypt, which would imply that there is some level of trade going on in ancient times that as far away as the Americas. Again, a lot of archaeologists would say, oh, that's impossible, it could never happen. But then the actual physical evidence is suggesting otherwise. And then the recent DNA evidence around Tutankhamun and the links with Europeans, especially people in Britain and Ireland, out of all the people in Europe who have DNA links to Tutankhamun, it's strongest of all in Britain and Ireland. Isn't that a strange coincidence?
That's very interesting. That's very interesting, and we may develop this in a moment. But I wanted to ask you for my audience. You mentioned this clay tablet that is in the Istanbul Museum, the deeds of Supiliuliuma. Could you tell us how it ties in with Scotia and her story, and what is the impact of this tablet in her adventure, please?
Well, one of the things you don't really get from the story in the Irish and Scottish text is a reason why she would have wanted to run away. So that's where the Egyptian stuff comes in. But in Egyptian texts, you don't really find a whole lot of information about actually a key event that might have caused her to flee. So what's called the Zanzibar affair, I think I've said that right, is documented on this cuneiform tablet which you showed. That's written in the sort of ancient Sumerian script. I think it would have been written in Assyrian at this point by then. Would that have been the international language of the time, I think?
Yes.
The Babylonian Assyrian language rather than
Yes, and the
ancient
Akkadian,
Sumerian.
the
Okay,
writing. Yeah.
okay, yeah, it would have been a development from the original Sumer language, but
Yeah.
later. So that was like the equivalent of what people use English as an international language now. That would have been the international language then. So obviously, this is coming from a Hittite ruler, and they had different language, but Hittites and the Egyptians could communicate with each other using the cuneiform script. So this actually gives the details of I really have trouble saying some of these names. King Sopiluma, I think, the first. I'm just not going to say that again. It's just too hard. But anyway, his son apparently went to Egypt to try and help after receiving this letter from an Egyptian queen saying, right, my husband has died. Everything has all gone to pot. And in a nutshell, I mean, I've reproduced some of the letter there for people to read it themselves, So as much as possible, I put the original text in, and people can judge for themselves rather than me just saying all this and that. And this guy did this and this lady did that. I I presented the actual translations of the original text. From this is a letter that was written around 1353 or 4, I think, about a year before Tutankhamun died.
So that would
So
be the proof that this letter was not written by Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's wife.
exactly,
It's
it
written
could.
by another sister.
And who would the other sister, the second sister, she died. So we don't have much details about the other ones, but we do know that Mary Taton did become the great royal wife of Akhenaten after the two wives. He had Nefertiti, who was her mother, and then Tutankhamun's mother, Kia. They both died, unfortunately. There's a lot of deaths in the family, huge number of deaths. Menkaten had died before, and I never know. Is it Tia or Taya? His own mother. She died
Tiyi,
too.
Tiyi, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when she died, the whole empire went really belly up because she was holding everything, and then yeah.
Yeah. So you had quite a lot of deaths in a short period of time. And then, of course, Akhenaten himself died, and there's no record of what happened to him. He just died. I suspect that Horemheb, the later pharaoh, the last one of the dynasty, that he probably destroyed all the records about how any of these people died, and certainly smashed up a lot of their tombs. And the bodies have been put in temporary sort of hidden away chambers, not their original burial places, because of the desecration. But anyway, so somebody, it appears, rescued Mary Tatum, and this would appear to be maybe what happened. So the son he wrote about, Zenanza, that's the son, he got killed, and the Hittites blamed the Egyptians, and the guy. By the time all this had kind of played itself out, and there was like a lot of to and throwing arguments, I the second had become the pharaoh because Tutankhamun died at 1819, again very mysteriously. So by the time he was dead, this was all being talked about, and um, they couldn't agree on what happened and who was to blame, and so they ended up with a war between the Hittites and the Egyptians. Um, but so we've got a probable cause. So there's an absolutely very, very strong reason for her to want to leave, because her whole family seems to be dying very in succession, one after another, and there's obviously uh, tremendous animosity between the Hittites and Egypt. Under Akhenaten, Egypt became a lot weaker because he was obsessed with Artemism and the religious life, and he really didn't care about international relations very much. Egypt got poorer and weaker under his reign, and so I could well imagine that she'd be thinking, I've got to get out of here. Her husband Smenkhero had died, um, so in later books. Gaethios is the main name that's associated with her husband. There's various other names, depending on which book you're reading. There's many different versions of the story. So, and we don't actually know exactly who these people were that she went to Spain with. There's mentions about Scythia and Armenia, and in that time, Armenia was a very different place, and it would have reached down into Turkey and up into sort of what's now Russia. And so there were a whole bunch of different kingdoms at that time. So it's difficult to really place who it was. I think possibly it could have been a Phoenician ruler or nobleman that rescued her, possibly, or it could have been the Hittites. Maybe they would have seen it as advantageous because of political intrigue to actually to help her, even though she was Egyptian. They didn't like the Egyptians. They could have thought, well, it might be to our advantage. But then the Hittites weren't really a very much of a maritime people. The Mycenaeans and the Phoenicians were a lot more sort of involved in that. But then who's to say she may have gone off in a fleet of Egyptian ships that belonged to the Amarna royal family? They'd certainly found three ships with Egyptian artifacts around that time period off the northeastern coast of Britain. So the time period of these ruined ships is exactly right, although they can't really tell exactly whether they were Egyptian, whether they were Mycenaean, or something else from the ships themselves. But there was content from Egypt along with them. So that's again a key bit of information that fits with the story.
What is I see this beautiful picture that's at the end of the book. Um, it's written John Fergus or his illustration entitled Queen Scotia unfurls the sacred banner. So this is the Scottish side of the story, Queen Scotia. So
Well,
could you tell us?
that was actually done by an Irishman who was connected
Okay.
with Daniel O'Connell in the sort of the movement for the emancipation of the native Irish. Um, because you may or may not know, but basically Catholicism, which most Irish people Catholic, that was basically illegal in Ireland under the British government. And he wanted an Irish parliament and he wanted um, emancipation for the Irish people. And Scotia or Scotia was very much a symbol of this sort of sovereignty. Of course, she didn't look anything like that black and white image. That's just completely stylized. Nobody really knew what she looked like, but we do know a lot better what she looked like. She looked a lot more like this because that's an actual bust of Mary Tatum, and there's other ones of her. There's other depictions of her. Here's one here, another depiction of her. So she obviously didn't look like a white Irish woman. She would have looked as typically Egyptian, I'm sure. But of course, those busts from the time may well have been painted, but of course, all the paint's gone off them because they're over 3,000 years old. So, of course, they've got deteriorated over time. So we don't really know what she would have looked like exactly.
Did she have a descendants in Ireland?
Yes, she she was married, and her descendants were already sort of, sort of growing up or grown up when the Malaysian people, as they're described as, um, or the Gaels, arrived into southwest Ireland. And there was this huge battle when she was killed, but there was actually a series of battles and a very long war between the Malaysian people and the predecessors called the Tua Danann, the people of Danu or Dana or Anu, uh, three names for the same goddess. And they did actually win this war, but unfortunately, Scotia didn't survive very long. Um, she died in that battle. She fell from her horse, or maybe the horse was shot. It's not very specific about how. We know she fell from her horse there and was buried there. In some stories of a legend, she was pregnant. Um, so she could have been hit with an arrow, the horse could have been hit with an arrow or a spear or whatever. But on a sort of rocky ground there, if you did fall from a horse, you probably have a good chance that you would die from the fall if you're galloping along at speed. That could probably kill you. So yeah, that's it. That's the grave, and I think is that below. I forget. I think that might be the horse's grave beneath. I can't. Yeah, that's it. That's the other one. So you've got those two graves there, and it's never been exhumed. I wish it would be, and maybe it will be one day. The National Monuments people in Ireland had a quick look at it, and they said it wasn't really worth investigating. But I think there'd be a huge cost in sending a team there because it's like, depending on how fast you can walk, 30 to 60 minutes to get there. If you're very fit, you could probably make it in 30 minutes on a dry day, but there's no proper footpaths. It's just mud. And then you've got these little tiny footbridges, which are literally that wide at the bottom for your feet, and they've kind of got a sort of V shape on them so you can hold onto the railings. But it's not you couldn't really carry equipment down there. So, I mean, you need a helicopter really to take any large amount of equipment. There's no access by car or bus or truck. So I would think that there's really no interest in doing anything with it because one, you can't exploit it financially. Two, there's nowhere to put a car park. and three, you can't actually get a team down there easily to go and do an excavation or any kind of work on the place. So it'd be easier just to dismiss it as not of interest, and then you can justify not going there, not doing any work, because they probably want to spend money on other things, other sites which are more accessible, which also may have more commercial value as well. So I know I'm sounding a bit cynical, but it doesn't really surprise me that much. You know, there's a lot of money in tourism, so if you can't make any money from a site because of its location and the topography, then I think they're not really that interested in those kind of sites that are out of the way and hard to access.
It can, in a way, it protects it.
Yeah, it does. It means the number of visitors is relatively low. Although, I mean, a lot of people do go there, but it's quite hard to get to, especially in winter, because you're literally going to have Wellington boots or big walking boots, and you're going to be sloshing through a lot of mud to get there. I mean, I almost fell over a couple of times, slipping on the mud. Fortunately, I didn't actually fall over and get covered in mud, but I almost fell a few times. And I'd be fairly used to rugged terrain and long walks. So yeah, it's certainly not an easy place to go and explore.
Yeah, I suppose. And so, why? Tell me, why did you show this stone? What are you? How are you linking this stone to Scotia's story?
Well, she is linked to the stone, which is called the Stone of Destiny or the Stone of Scone, and it is reputedly the original Leofal, which is the coronation stone that was used for the High Kings of Ireland. It was brought by various different people who are accredited with having bringing it. The most famous of all is Niall of the Nine Hostages, who supposedly brought it. But it's not a hugely well-known fact, but the Scotti people, as the Romans called them, sorry, are actually descended from Scotia. That's why they have that name, and they used to raid Western Britain, and they were a scourge of the Romans. And eventually, they actually invaded. There was a bit of a sort of disaster for Roman Britain in, I think, was it 367? I think something like that, when there was a sort of multi-point attack on Roman Britain from the Picts in northern Scotland, um, northern Britain, and also the Saxons, I think maybe the Angles, and then the Scotti from Ireland also attacked. And then over a period of time, they actually colonized Western Scotland and then eventually took over the whole of Scotland, which is why the Scottish language is very, very close to Irish.
That will explain a lot. And so
Yeah, the name comes from Scotland, and they supposedly brought this stone with them, and that stone has been used to crown the Scottish kings ever since that time. And then it was stolen by Edward I of England, who brought it down, and it was kept in Westminster Abbey for, oh gosh, how long? About nearly 1,000 years, before it was given back finally.
Yeah, I remember there's a great movie. I think it is Stone of Scone, where you see the true story of students stealing it. That's quite.
Well, that's the second time it was stolen. It was stolen by the English and then stolen back by the Scots. Just a bunch of students. I forget the details. Was it 1950 something? Uh, there's a film about it.
Yeah.
Trying to think who's the really famous guy who was the main character in that. Who was in Train Spotting. Guy who played Begbie in Train Spotting. What was his name again? Robert Carlyle. That's it. Yeah, he played the main character. So they stole it, as sort of, part of a Scottish independence movement. It got slightly damaged, actually. A little corner got broken off, which has been repaired since. And of course, they were looking for it. I think it was actually placed in Scone Abbey, maybe, where it originally was kept, and then recovered. We got a tip off to the police. They went and caught the stone. They caught the people, of course, who did the robbery. But I think there's been this desire of Scotland to have the stone back because it's an ancient possession of the Scottish people. And I imagine it was quite a blow to have, the Norman English, Anglo-Norman kings crowned on their stone, the Plantagenets and all the dynasties after,
So
because
this, yeah,
there
sorry,
was
go
this legitimization of power, because of course the Normans were blow-ins, and later ones were also from Holland and from Germany, and being crowned on this very ancient stone give you kind of a legitimacy, going right back to the early Scottish kings who themselves were descended from the Irish. And there's always been this long connection between Scotland and Ireland going back thousands of years, and even some connections with Wales and the western coast of England too.
So could we say that the original Scotty people are of Egyptian royal descent?
Yes, that would be pretty much what the Scots claim in the Declaration of Arbroath, and there's also connections to the sons of Mill, the Spanish connection there, which has actually been proven in the DNA, because they spent quite some time in northwest Spain before coming over to Scotland and then Ireland. And if you look at the DNA now between the modern Irish people and the people of that sort of Basque region of northern Spain, there's very close DNA links, which again fits perfectly with this story about the Malaysians coming from Spain and coming into Kerry and then gradually taking over Ireland from there. Eventually, they made their way to Tara, which is like the sovereign centre of Ireland. And of course, the stone that's there now is, in my opinion, not the original. I think the one that's currently in the museum in Perth in Scotland is the original Leofol that was taken to Scotland by the Irish and used there for the coronation of their kings in what was at the time called Dalradia, the kingdom there. And they were, legitimate rulers, if you like, whereas the Normans are very much usurpers, Norse French people who came in and won over Britain by conquest. They weren't in any way native to Britain, unlike uh, the peoples of the British Isles who've been there for thousands of years before. So I think that's probably why they stole the stone, to kind of give themselves a sort of a more legitimate sort of standing, and so also to demoralize the Scots as well. Look, they nicked their prized famous stone, and well, it didn't get given back till I think a couple of years ago. I think it was. I forget the exact date when it was given back, but it was brought back down uh, to Westminster again for the coronation of Charles III, and then returned afterwards back to Scotland again.
This is a fascinating story, especially when it ties with the royal English and Scottish families. This stone, why this stone? Was it coming from Egypt with Meritaten? Was it an Egyptian stone that was crowning the Egyptian royalty? Did she bring it with her, or was it a stone that was originally from Ireland?
Well, there's some of the Scottish stories and versions of the stories. I think it was it Walter Bow's version possibly suggests that they brought it from Egypt. But then there's much earlier story, particularly the Book of Taking of Ireland, Lubba Gabala Erin, which is 5th century onwards that was compiled, 5th century AD. So it's really old. And that actually suggests that that stone was already here. It was a possession of the Tuatha De Danann people, one of the 4 treasures of the Tuatha De Danann. So this stone was a sacred stone used for the coronation of the High Kings of Ireland. And then it would have been inherited, I suppose, by the Malaysian people once they arrived here, descendants of Mill and Scotia. They probably would have been crowned using that stone, those people that became the rulers, and then it was brought on. So the most likely story, I think, is the older one, and that the stone was brought by a different group of people, the Tuatha De Danann, who came from an unknown island somewhere. It could be somewhere in the Baltic, could be. So some suggestions are Scythia, others about Gotland, or possibly Iceland. No one actually knows, but we know they came from an island somewhere to the north of Ireland. It's not, the name of the isn't even given, but we do know there were 4 cities that had these different treasures, in the land that they came from, which is unnamed. We don't know the name of that land. And they brought that stone, and then it resided in Ireland ever since until around probably 300 or 400 in the Common Era. See, it was brought to Scotland, where it stayed until Edward the First stole it and took it down to England. So
So
that's
let's, yeah,
still
sorry.
there, and it could be. We don't know how old the stone is. If it was already there when the Malaysians came, then it would make it at least 3,300 years old. It could be. It could be 4 or 5 thousand years old. That stone, possibly.
So this stone is conferring special powers or luck to a monarch that is crowned on it.
There's a legend that when the king would stand on the stone, it would make a noise. It would screech. Uh, I think that might be the foundation of the Arthurian myth, possibly. With the sword in the stone, you pull the stone, only the rightful king can pull the sword from the stone. I know that's slightly different. You've got a sacred sword, another of the 4 treasures, the sword of Nuada. So it might be a bit of a mixing of these 2 things, of this sacred stone and a sacred sword. But the idea being that, you know, only the rightful king could really stand on a stone and be legitimized, because things were very different back in the Celtic societies. You didn't have automatic rights to become king because of your lineage. If say your father or grandfather had been king, you could certainly become eligible, but there was no guarantee that you would be. If you were a really terrible ruler and a rotten person, and knew you were drinking all day and, you know, womanizing and cheating people and killing people for no reason or something, they'd probably go, "Oh, we don't want this person as king," and you wouldn't actually be allowed to become king. Whereas in later times, you automatically, if you were the eldest son, say in the British royal family, or whatever, Danish or whatever country, it became the norm that you would become the king if you were the oldest, regardless of how bad a person you were. You would just inherit it. That wasn't the case in Ireland or Scotland in earlier times. If you were not suitable, then you could be passed over. And the people, it probably wouldn't be the commoners, but certainly people who are like clan chiefs or whatever, the nobility, they would select someone who they thought was appropriate for the role, rather than just someone because of their bloodline who automatically gets to have this position. So
Well,
quite.
yeah, come. Well, this book, I couldn't put it down, and many people say that. Everyone actually who bought it say that because it ties a missing link between amazing puzzle pieces of history, human history. Akhenaten's family, Tutankhamun's family, this dynasty that was very special to Egypt, it's very famous, passing by Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann, the magical traditions and myth of Ireland, and then Scotland and England, and the war between the royal families, the Stone of Scone. I mean, everything in this book is linked, and it you read it, although it's based on really archaeological studies and traditional studies as well, and ancient documents. You read that like kind of a novel. It's not, but you can't put it down. You go, oh my gosh, what? Where she's next? Where she's next? And what's gonna happen? It's absolutely well written, and I really highly recommend it.
Well, it's
So
an amazing story. Just objectively, I think that the lives of the Amarna royal family would actually make an amazing like TV series or a film. I'm amazed that really no one's ever done anything uh, about this family, because it's like a real like a soap opera. It's incredible, really. And the thing that's interesting is it's all real. I mean, you've got the records, like I say, from the Hittites, from the Egyptians themselves, and then you've got these later stories from the Ptolemaic period through into the early Christian era, right, onwards and onwards into medieval and early Renaissance. It wasn't just plucked out of thin air. There's so many points of reference there. I think some of the details are sketchy because over time, obviously, there's been embellishments and etc., and not all ancient historians were entirely accurate. But from what I've uncovered and looking at the research of other people who have done work before me, I I think there's a really, really strong case there. And what really should happen, I hope, will be somebody will go and excavate that grave, respectfully, I hope, and hope I would imagine they will find the remains of a woman there. And then if they can DNA test her remains, they can compare it with the remains of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. I think they found Nefertiti as well, if I'm right. I'm not 100% on that one, but they certainly have her brother and her father's remains. DNA testing is very quick now, isn't it? In
yeah.
the modern day, so they could solve this mystery very easily if someone wants to go and excavate that site. Well, I hope somebody will. I mean, it's just the will to do it, and obviously the finances. And I'm probably imagine you'd need some kind of permission from the Irish government to
Oh
go.
yes, you do. You do. So if
Uh,
an archaeologist or archaeology team, a university or research project was to ask permission, where should they go?
well, I think there's probably the National Monument Service, probably maybe the Office of Public Works. There must be a department within the Irish government that's probably. I don't actually know the department name, the correct name, but I would have thought that um, the archaeologists who've done this kind of thing in the past they'd probably have a fair idea who they need to contact, or they could find out fairly fast. I would have thought, to try and get the permissions for this. I mean, who knows? I mean, there are archaeological teams within Ireland, within Ireland's own universities, who could do this. It just requires the money and the will to do it. So
That's a question of funds, usually here in this country. Yeah, yeah. What I like also with this book is that not only tells her story, but also you have the background story of what's happening in the world at that time in different locations. And it's really fascinating because you are there. You are there. It's incredible. So tell us where we can find this book, please.
Well, you can get it from my own website, which is lukeeastwood.com. But if you're in Europe, that's probably the best place to get it. And you get a signed copy. But if you're in, say, North America, I think the cheapest is Barnes and Noble. You get it there for the best price. It's also on Amazon, I think, in America and Australia and all the different Amazons. I think they also have it. So if you really want a signed copy, you'd have to buy it off my website. But then the postage could be, if you're a long way from Ireland, it's going to be a lot more. So, you know, as I said, Barnes and Noble has the best price in in North America for that book. So, but it wouldn't be a signed copy though. But then that doesn't really matter for most people. Um, So yeah, and some bookshops will have it. Mostly in Britain and Ireland, I think. I don't think it's in any bookshops in the United States at the moment.
Okay, I will put all the links in the description of this video, anyhow. And so, any last words about Scotia or anything else that is in your heart at the moment?
Well, yeah, I've just in the last week or two been seeing about these announcements about the Giza Plateau and the pyramids and the possible new discoveries there. I mean, I'm not going to say too much. It's definitely this, it's definitely that, but it would appear that there's something previously unknown from these satellite radar sensing, or forget the technical term exactly, that all the time we're seeing new discoveries which are changing uh, what people believe to be true. And I would say to people, you read an old history book, from the 1950s or even really recently, and there's this very conventional view. You know, historians, archaeologists, academics tend to be very, very narrow, very conventional. They don't want to take any risks. So the version of history you get is very, very conservative. And then when somebody finds something new, it tends to be ignored completely or dismissed as rubbish. So, one of the core reasons Scotia's story is dismissed is this crazy belief that the ancient peoples weren't able to cross the sea in their ships, which is completely untrue. I mean, I present a lot of evidence to show that's untrue. There's even frescoes, I think, found in Crete of ancient ships, which are obviously seagoing ships, massive things. I think this fresco's dated to 1700 BCE. So it proves straight off that, they were capable of a lot more. There's a lot of examples. I mean, look at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. They're redefining, the start date for civilization. If you talk to people before Professor Smith's work became like publicly known, a lot of academics say, "Oh, civilization started 5,000 BCE." But then, they already knew there's proof that Jericho was probably started around 10 or 11,000 BCE. That's like the oldest city in the world, supposedly. I mean, that's a long, long time ago. So this conventional idea, I that everything's much sooner than you might think. That's very much coming from academia and a reluctance to accept that we could have become more sophisticated a lot earlier in time. So I'd say to people not to take that on board too much and be willing to question, be willing to sort of look at these new ideas, this new evidence. Of course, it needs to be backed up, but a lot of this stuff, actually, you find there is evidence. It is proven. Look at what happened with Göbekli Tepe. People weren't interested in these T-pillars at first. They just thought it was a load of old junk. It wasn't important. And now we know they're part of these temples that go back to, what was it? We're talking like 11,000 years ago, at least. But always when there's something new, people are already rushing to dismiss it as rubbish. I would say keep an open mind, really, is what I'm trying to say. And, just wait. We may find that in a year or 5 years from now, they'll be exploring all underneath the Sphinx, and there is something of interest, of value to be found there. Really, it's a matter of waiting for someone to go and investigate properly. So I'm quite excited about that, but at the same time, I'm not going to say, oh, it's this, it's that. I don't know. We don't really know that. They're not that specific, are they? These they're a bit vague, these images. So it really takes somebody to go down there and investigate. Just in the same way, someone's going to have to go down to this grave where Scotia is reputedly buried and actually go and start doing some digging, really. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to if you want to prove something is true, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So, in the waiting of confirmation by archaeology, we have the confirmation, we have all the data by ancient records and historical research. So I advise everyone to buy this book. As an Egyptologist myself, I was riveted. I was like, couldn't put this down. So I really, really recommend it. And you'll find the links below to get this amazing book. Luke Eastwood, thank you so much for this and for coming on my channel.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So all good blessings to everyone, and get this as soon as possible. You'll enjoy it. Bye, everyone.
The last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of Egypt tried to erase Akhenaten and his entire family from the history of Egypt. But he failed. The story of Akhenaten's oldest daughter, Akhenaten, also known as Scotia or Scotta, survived down the centuries in the annals of the Irish and the Scots and in the folklore of Spain down to the present day. And the frantic flight across ancient Europe and her life and death on the far western reaches of Europe is a story that still resonates even today.